Research methods. Why do we need to study research methods? We do research because without research we wouldn't know anything. There would be not a lot of knowledge. Knowledge is really the foundation of civilization. Without research and without discovering things, we would still be living in the Dark Ages. This is shown when universities were starting to be built and attended. That's when the world underwent the Enlightenment and the Renaissance, and art and science really became accepted. Research helps build a foundation of knowledge, and every time a piece of knowledge is created and added to the body of knowledge, it's like a brick is put on that foundation. And each brick that's put on, each piece of knowledge, is then looked at by the next researcher, who then adds their brick, adds to the body of knowledge. Research is really just a set of skills that you can learn. It's a way of thinking about things that happen or are happening in the world. And it's sort of a lifelong habit of asking questions with the prospect or the purpose of trying to solve a problem or make something better or just understand something better. And so you're going to be asking as a researcher all kinds of questions, but things like what is happening and why is it happening and what is the effect of what is happening and who is being affected by whatever is happening. That's in a nutshell what research is and how you and why you do it. Research is really something that you should always do. It's something that you should do as part of your professional practice, whether you're a web designer or a videographer or a photographer, whatever it is that you do. You should always be thinking and asking questions about how you do your job and how things are done in your industries. So that's the big thing about research. It never really should stop. One way to think about research and why we should be doing research is to think about what research can do. It can provide helpful information to a lot of different groups or stakeholders. In our industries, we have designers, web designers, graphic designers, photographers, we have animators, videographers. But for this example, let's talk about the designer. So this could be the designer of web or print. And what research can do for a designer is tell them if their designs are working or not, if their functionality works or not, if their message is getting out there in the way that they intended. The next group would be the client. The client needs to the research can help the client understand what it is you do as a designer. It can also help them understand why certain things need to be done or how their own end users, which is the third group, look at their products. So all three different stakeholders can learn a lot from research, and that's one of the reasons it's valuable. It's not just the researcher that gets the benefit in applied research. It's anybody that touches that product or that process. We can look at research in a few different ways and a few different viewpoints from different perspectives. And those are the perspective of applications, like how do we apply the research once it's done? Objectives, what is it that we're trying to find out in the research? And then the inquiry mode, which is also called the approach, and sort of what types of information are we trying to get?
When you talk about research from the perspective of how it is applied, the application of it, there are basically two categories. There's pure research and applied research. Pure research is mostly concerned with developing and testing theories and hypotheses, and it also is concerned in trying to discover better ways to actually conduct research. So in a way, it's research about research. Now, applied research is research that is done with the goal of actually applying the findings. So it focuses on a problem or a phenomenon or a group of people, and the research that's done is done with the goal of actually applying it to the actual situation. When you look at research from the perspective of the research objectives, or basically what it is that it wants to do or what it aims to do, those types of research can be classified as descriptive study, a correlational study, an explanatory study, or an exploratory study. A descriptive study tries to describe in a very organized way a situation or a problem or a phenomenon, something that is happening. It may be how a product works, but basically it is trying to describe what the main things that are happening in respect to the issue or the problem or the product or whatever it is that you are studying. In a correlational study, the researcher is trying to discover or establish a relationship or association between two or more things or aspects in a situation or a phenomenon. So it's asking, does one thing happening affect this other thing that's happening? Is there a causal relationship there? An explanatory research approach talks about, it acknowledges that there's a relationship, but it tries to explain why and how that relationship exists, why it's there, why there's a cause and effect relationship between two or more elements or aspects of a situation. And finally, the exploratory research is really a study that is done to look at or explore an area where not much has been done before. There isn't a lot of research maybe in this area, or it's looking at ways that maybe there needs to be more research done in the area. So that's an exploratory study. And because exploratory studies often have more than one objective and different types of objectives, some parts of an exploratory research might be descriptive, and some might be correlational, and some might be explanatory. Many exploratory research projects are trying to determine whether something is feasible, like a program is feasible. So this is also called a feasibility study or even a pilot study. And that's just sort of a pre-study to see if a bigger study would be a good idea. If you look at research from the inquiry perspective, this is basically the approach that you can take in research. A lot of people call these research designs. They are not. They're not designs. They're an approach. They're a type of design, a way to look at design and the methods that you're going to use in your design. So you might have a quantitative approach, a qualitative approach, or mixed methods approach, which uses both quantitative and qualitative elements in the research. Very quickly, because we'll talk a lot more about each of these. The quantitative approach is very structured, has a lot of guidelines and rules, but it also provides a lot of very clear data that can be easily analyzed and generalized to other populations or groups that are being researched. The qualitative is a little bit more philosophical. It's open, it's flexible. It's less of a structured approach, and it really is aimed at finding out feelings and perspectives and experiences in situations or phenomenons or events or whatever you're studying, rather than finding out hard data about what is happening. And then you have the mixed methods approach, which uses both quantitative and qualitative. And really a lot of research these days does use both, and very common to see both in applied projects and thesis projects in this major.
Most people think of research in respect to how the researcher approaches the study. So that's the inquiry modes. And we talked about them on the previous slide, but I want to give you some examples. So for quantitative, you're thinking about how much something is happening. So for example, if you were doing a study on an e-commerce website, and you know that users of the site have been having a particular problem, for quantitative study, you would find out how many times that particular problem was happening to users. Qualitative studies, questions, you want to find out about the problem, not how many times it happened, but about it, the nature of it. So you would ask things like, how do you feel about this problem, or what other problems, what are all the problems you've encountered? And so for your e-commerce website, you would ask them, how they feel about that particular problem, but you would also ask them if they had any other problems. And then you have mixed method, which is used when the researcher wants to have both data about, how many or the extent, and wants information, qualitative information about, how participants feel and what are all the issues surrounding this topic. And so for your e-commerce site, you would probably ask users, what problems are there and how do you feel about those problems? And then you'd also ask them how many times those problems have happened. So you get both the qualitative and the quantitative information. In the textbook, you'll find a lot more about all three approaches than I have given you in your lectures. And you really should read these pages. So pages 14 through 19 is a lot more about qualitative and quantitative approaches. And in fact, on page 18, you'll find table 1.2 that shows the differences between qualitative, quantitative, and mixed method approaches. And I think reading through that may help you understand what the differences are and what you would want to use each of them for. From pages 19 to 30, you'll read a lot more about mixed methods. And because in the things that we tend to study, mixed methods is really probably the best approach that you can use, because really we want to find out both kinds of data. We want to find out, how often things are happening, but we also want to find out why they're happening and what people think about them, what their attitudes are. So it's really important that you read through all these pages 19 to 30. On page 21 is a really great flow chart that shows how you would integrate quantitative and qualitative approaches into a mixed method research study. And then here, the link at the bottom under video is it says about 6 minutes long, I think, and it's about creating mixed method research. And it's a video by John Creswell, who is considered to be sort of the father of, or at least the preeminent expert in both qualitative and mixed methods research, and quantitative as well, but he is a social scientist, so he uses mostly qualitative but also mixed methods. So that video is great for really getting a good understanding of what mixed methods is and how to use it.
Quantitative research follows a positivist research philosophy, which is based on a scientific approach to research. The researcher would observe objectively in an attempt to either prove or disprove their hypothesis. This is made possible through the collection of data that can be measured. It has the advantage of being able to use larger samples, which would then often be used to represent a larger group. A good example of this would be polling for an election. A sample group is used to represent the population, and they are then asked specific questions that can be measured. It is then possible to gauge who is leading in the polls and therefore more likely to win the election. On the other hand, qualitative research tends to use an exploratory scientific method that enables a more in-depth inquiry into the subject area. The research is used to generate a hypothesis and develop an understanding about particular people, places, or groups. It uses words and images rather than numbers and focuses on a smaller sample group to help aid a deeper analysis of the topic. Qualitative researchers prefer not to make generalizations based on their findings. Mixed methods research involves combining quantitative and qualitative research. It takes a more pragmatic approach whereby the type of research used should be based on what will best help you answer your research question. The research required will generally fit somewhere on this continuum. Your research question can also be a good indicator as to which way one should approach their research. For example, your question may include words like measure or explore, clear pointers as to the type of research that needs to be carried out.
All right, we're to the end of this presentation, and in this presentation we talked about why we do research, what research can do for different stakeholders, the types of research from the different viewpoints of application, observation, and inquiry mode. And then we went deeper into the inquiry mode because we really use that terminology of the approaches to help us decide what our research design is going to look like. So that's the qualitative, the quantitative, and the mixed methods.